over to you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to join you here. And this is, I think, such an important topic that you are dealing with. Physical education, swimming is about so much more than about sports. But let me just share a few slides with you. The first point really I want to make is that, brown gall is absolutely not alone. When you actually look at this in the light of some data, there are some parts in the world where actually every 15-year-old or virtually every 15-year-old is able to swim without assistance. If you go to Sweden, the Netherlands, Norway, Finland, Germany, Slovenia, Australia, Denmark, and so on, I think you can pretty much count on, over 80% of 90% of people being able to swim when they are used. But if you look at the other end of the spectrum, we're talking about Pakistan, that's pretty much near the end, where you have less than 1 in 5 15-year-olds being able to swim. So there are huge differences across the world. In some parts of the world, swimming has become part of the culture, part of education. In other parts, it's at best an extracurricular activity, something that you in your own time, on your own initiative, but it's certainly not part of public policy about the system. Well, but the good side of this is when you look at this chart, we can do that. It is actually quite possible to get every young person to a level that they can actually be comfortable with. But, I want to put this in a much broader context here. Swimming isn't just about athletics. It's about really becoming a confident citizen in this world. And we need that more than ever. We have just gone through a difficult phase with the pandemic. That has actually been incredibly difficult for young people. They were isolated. They couldn't, exercise. They had many constraints on their lives in many ways. They were socially disconnected. It's been particularly hard for young people, this pandemic. And the future will always surprise us. There will be always disruptions to our lives, to our education systems. Now, climate change is going to disrupt our lives a lot more than a pandemic. And, artificial intelligence puts us to a real test and puts education to a real test. What does it mean to be human in a world where the kind of things that are easy to teach and test have also become easy to digitize, to automate? We know how to educate second-class robots, people who are very good at repeating what we told them. But what makes us human in this world and actually, having that self-efficacy, that self-confidence that swimming and sports bring is a big part of that. And, that's not the end of the story. We've seen so many disruptive forces in our lives that actually make it so much more important these days that you do not just know something. In fact, this world no longer rewards you just for what you know. Now, Google knows everything. The modern world rewards you for what you can do with what you know. Now, your agency, can you live with yourself? Can you live with people who are different from you? Can you live with this planet? The kind of things, again, that are easy to teach are disappearing. If you have a job that you can explain in the form of a formula, tomorrow a robot is going to do it better for you. Now, we are seeing a decline in routine tasks in our lives, in our work. Now, we are seeing a rise in technology-intensive tasks. And you put the two things together, that gives you a sense of the future of work. And then, knowledge around us expands exponentially. And is filled with so many facets, so many features, so many things that we could be learning in school. But the important thing, they all come with people. And that's a really important point. Learning is never a transactional business. Learning is always a social, a relational phenomenon. Your favorite subject in primary school probably had a lot more to do with the teacher who taught you than with the content of the subject. We learn always from and with people. It is that human interaction that learning is about. And, the school curriculum is just a tiny box. And they're trying to sort of bring everything into this little box. But what often happens is that the beautiful features of this world become very shallow shadows of themselves. Again, when you were in primary school, probably you loved science. Science was about discovering nature. It was about, trying things, experimenting. You could do things, you could observe things, you understood cause and effect, all of those kinds of things. Children all love science. But then, as you become older, many turn away from this early love. Science becomes a subject of formulas and equations that have actually very little to do with the nature of science now. I'm a scientist by background, and actually it often breaks my heart when I see how we teach science like religion. We make people believe in some scientific theory, then we give them lots of exercises to practice, and at the end we test whether they learned what we told them, whether they produce the answers that we have. Well, science has nothing to do with learning answers. Science is about questioning the established wisdom of our times. Now, and then, we put more and more and more things into this little box of the school curriculum that often crowds things out like sports. There's no time left. You can do it in your free time, but we do not have time in the school curriculum because there's so many things, so many often superficial things that we need to learn or want to young children to learn. Our school systems have become a mile wide and just an inch deep. We teach a lot of stuff at very superficial depths. Biggest challenge today is to teach fewer things at greater depths, to think about the kind of things that actually make us human. The realm of human knowledge, the realm of ethics and judgment. Think about this world of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is not a magic power. It's just an incredible amplifier and a great accelerator, but it will amplify good ideas and good practice in the same way it will amplify bad ideas and bad practice. That is the challenge today. It is about us as humans who make that decision. Do we use it as a force for good? Is it going to become a force for bad? The realm of political and civic life. We're all born with, bonding social capital. It's easy for you to, work with your family, with your neighbors, with people who look like you, who think like you. And social media today reinforce it. It's actually really, really hard to live with people who are different from you, to actually engage with different ways of thinking, to appreciate different cultures. And actually, sports is one of the tools that we have to do exactly that, to create that bridging social capital. In physical education, you do not just, become more athletic, but you learn to take responsibility for yourself. You learn to take responsibility for other people. You develop courage, leadership, engagement, agency. You do things. You work in a real-time environment. Every second matters. That is really why it's so important to build that kind of bridging social capital, help us position ourselves, reposition ourselves every day new in the world in which we live. The realm of creativity, aesthetics, design, very important these days. The realm of natural and physical health. I'm going to come to that in a moment. And then the realm of economic life. Now, those are the domains that really make us human. We need to engage education much more in those than we currently do. At the OECD, we have developed something that we call the learning compass. Learning is not just about content. Learning is about the knowledge, the skills, but also the attitudes and values. Once again, often we teach values at the margins of education. We put them sort of on top of the education system. Yeah, we should also have a little bit on values. No? Well, in the world in which we live today, actually values should be very much at the center, at the core of education. So, what gives you orientation in a world that is increasingly volatile, complex, ambiguous? Can you live with yourself again? Can you live with people who are different from you? Can you live with this planet? And attitudes, a lot in life is about attitude, your motivation, your engagement with others, your openness, your resilience, your curiosity. And when I talk about skills, finally, this is not just about, physical skills or cognitive skills. It's a lot about social and emotional skills, and we can all develop them in conjunction. So let's talk a bit about physical education. And I talk about it in a way that you might be surprising. What we know is that physical education actually relates very closely to the well-being of students. Why is that important? Well, look at 10-year-olds. 10-year-olds are typically happy children. You can see here 6 out of 10 10-year-olds say, yes, my daily life is filled with things that interest me. Now, I feel cheerful and in good spirits. I felt active and vigorous. I woke up feeling fresh and rested. I feel calm and relaxed. And you can see actually not such a difference between boys and girls. Both boys and girls at age 10, seem to be happy children, at least, the majority of them. But when you look at that same picture at age 15, you can see the bars get much shorter. And you see something else. There's a huge gap between boys and girls. As 10-year-olds grow older in school, they become less happy, but boys are actually seeing less of that decline than girls. The decline for girls is really, really dramatic. Now you can say, well, maybe that's just, developmental psychology. As people get older, they become more self-conscious and so on. And yeah, that may be a bit of the story, but there's a big education story behind all of this. So well-being declines. If I would tell you, your 15-year-olds do worse in mathematics than your 10-year-olds, you'd probably do something about it, no? You'd think, well, something is going wrong in education. When we see that on well-being, we're not acting because often we do not even observe that. We do not have data to collect it. But that's something that we do at the OECD. How happy are children with their lives now? And let me show you this by country. You can see in the Netherlands, in Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Finland, Costa Rica, Croatia, Switzerland, and so on. You can see most 15-year-olds are happy with their lives. If you go to the other end of the story, Turkey, Korea, Hong Kong, Chinese Taipei, Macau, parts of China, you can actually see life satisfaction is not so great. There is a lot of variability across countries on this. So what do we know relates to that happiness or life satisfaction of young people? Well, actually, we have an answer to this. It has a lot to do with the social networks in which you're embedded. Students who talk or meet with friends after school tend to report higher levels of life satisfaction. Students who feel that their teacher knows who they are, knows who they want to become, helps them to engage. And sports is a wonderful subject to do that. Because in sports, you just don't talk to a class, you engage with students individually. And that is something that is really, really important on this. Good parental support, also important, socializing, and then last but not least, more physical activity. When you ask yourself, what accounts for people being anxious with schoolwork? It's usually anxiety with schoolwork and also high internet use. Unfortunately, internet use these days gets into the way of physical education, gets into the way of physical movement. 15-year-olds spend 30, 40, sometimes over 50 hours per week on the internet. So if you say, well, they don't have time for sports, well, actually, there's a lot of time for other things with questionable value on that. But as you can see, this varies across countries. So let's see how physical education gets into this. Now we can see here, there is a share of countries, if you go to Hungary, to Poland, the Russian Federation, Canada, Japan, United States, you can say, at least 50% of students are in schools that have 3 days or more of physical education at school every week now. But, that's not everywhere the case. You also have a number of countries where this is an absolute zero. I told you, United States is a country, actually 50% are 3 days or more in physical education at school. But there is another 40% where actually that is zero. So you can see even within a country, there can be a lot of polarization. Now, sometimes it happens, sometimes it not. And that happens when it becomes a kind of extracurricular kind of activity. Huge variability across this in the relative importance that physical education has. And you could see before, this is not just about academic performance. This is very much about, the sense of well-being, the sense of life satisfaction that young people bring with them. What is also important is that you can ask yourself, to what extent is physical and health not just an add-on to school, but actually a core component of the educational system? So something that is, treated on par with mathematics, with science, with history, with language. And you can see in primary school, that's called here ISCAD 1, you can see that's actually the case, in Turkey and Chile. You can see there's a lot of instruction time going into this, but you can see other countries where this is just a few hours per year. So a lot of variability on this, but it's still a relatively small share of countries which say, well, we don't want this just to be added, but we want this to be a really important core part of the education system. And what's also interesting, it's not just about, physical education. You can see here in many countries, it's become a very intentional component of student well-being now. Developing courage, developing leadership, developing emotional control, developing a sense of responsibility for others. Those are now quite explicit goals in the development of instruction of school curricula. So some countries actually have gone very, very far in building, this into the established school days. Well, how does it play out in terms of academic achievement? The reason why I say this is that many people still believe, you have to make a choice. If you want your students to be, cognitively fit, being good in math, good in science, you just can't spend that time on sports. Is there a trade-off, or are we talking about two sides of the same coin? And the answer is here. You can see the days of physical activity on the horizontal axis and the performance in science on the vertical axis. And when you look at students who do some physical activity, not too much, but some, you can actually see that learning outcomes go up. The more days that young kids at age 15, up to age 15, spend doing things in sports, the better they are in science performance, the better they are in mathematics performance, the better they are in reading performance. So this doesn't take time away from learning outcomes. It actually adds to learning outcomes. Now, it's different when you talk about vigorous physical activity. So when people actually, do intensive sports and spend a lot of time on that, there you can say, well, the relationship is a little bit positive, but then when you do too much of that, you do it every day, it's going downwards. And that's, easy to understand. When you do a lot of this, then of course it starts to compete with other things that you could be doing in school. But the point really is moderate physical activities, being engaged in sports, doing something actually is a positive, not a negative predictor of cognitive learning outcomes in other fields. And we should really take that to heart, that we're not talking about opposing ends on a spectrum, but really about two sides of the same coin. And, what we see again, and I showed you this already overall, now I show you this country by country, both moderate activities, but even more so vigorous physical activities actually is a positive predictor of life satisfaction. Now, students who are doing more do not just do better in school, but they also feel happier with their lives. It's not so easy to sort of distinguish cause and effect here. It could also be that happy children just do more sports, but that relationship is actually really important, that there is, a connection between what we do and how active we are and how happy we feel in our life. Now, let me bring swimming into this. I promised you this at the beginning, and let's start again. Huge variability across the world. Countries on the left side where you can actually see virtually every 15-year-old knows how to swim without assistance. Countries on the right side, a tiny minority of people. And that shows you to what extent swimming is really embedded in our education systems, in our culture, or to what extent it's an add-on that, you may or may not engage with. Now, that's the overall picture by country. But let's break that down a little bit now. When you look about this by age group, 0 to 8, 9 to 15, 16 plus, you can really see how this varies across countries. If you're in a high-income country, a good majority of 0 to 8-year-olds already know how to swim without assistance. So children learn that at very young ages. And we all know that physical activity is about age. The earlier you start, the more natural that activity will become to you. Things are harder. Physical activities are harder to learn later on. That's not true for other things. Other things actually you can learn quite easily, but physical activity is something that, it's not just true for swimming, it's true for skiing, it's true for everything that requires coordination, because the brain just, picks those things up better when you're early. And you can see here in high income country, you can take that for granted. The OECD countries for which I speak, also, this is quite well established. But when you go to low income countries, even at 16 plus years, you have less of 50% able to swim. But that's something that I think we should, take to heart. Yes, there's a little bit of growth by age everywhere, but there are huge gaps in terms of, income. Less wealthy countries, when they have school, they try to reserve that time for cognitive ability. And of course, it also requires expert teachers. It requires facilities. So there are a lot of requirements why swimming is not that easy to provide. You can look at this also, at a country level association between educational level and swimming ability. You can see very clearly where students only have primary education, a majority of students, now a large number of students, and I, highlight Pakistan as well here. It's not just that people don't know how to swim. Often they haven't really achieved much education. They have only achieved primary education. You can see there's a pretty robust cross-country correlation now. Higher levels of education correspond with a greater propensity to learn swim. Now, swimming and education generally are related. We should take that to heart. But the very last part I want to bring into this, and I think that's also really, really important, is that this is something that isn't just about the country you're born in or the culture you come from. It is also very, very much a story of gender. You can see in every income groups, men are more likely to have learned to swim without assistance than women. In high-income countries, the gap is not that big because virtually, everybody learns how to swim at age 15, or a good, very, very large majority. But what you can see very clearly here in low-income countries, in lower middle-income countries, in upper middle-income countries, the gender gap is really, really large. So that's a snapshot. I know I didn't have much time, but to give you a sense of where we are, but also to really make the point, I want to stress this again. We're not just talking about swimming. We're not just talking about sports. We're talking about the development of human capabilities. Now, the development that you build that agency to do things, to mobilize your cognitive, social, and emotional resources. That's what you've got to do when you swim. It's about yourself. It's about others. It's about building that co-agency, that capacity to work with others, and also that collective agency to do things together. And that's what we need for tomorrow's world. If you think about young learners for tomorrow, we want children who can adapt to the different worlds in which they live, who feel comfortable in a changing world, who feel, there is this dark lake, but, I know how to jump into this. I know how to survive. Children who build that agency, who can live in the world in which system. Children who can, trust in their positive impact on the environment around them, who cannot just absorb things to consume knowledge, but you can do things. And that when they do things, it's going to make a difference in this world, who can articulate their own experiences and views, and also children who can assert their authority, who are listened to by others. Children who are able to overcome their own challenges. Swimming takes a lot of courage. It's not a natural thing. If you just jump, you just drown. Swimming means, you take responsibility, you take that agency, you see change as an opportunity, and you create those opportunity for yourself and for others. It's not an easy agenda, and you can see we are still quite far from making that happen, particularly in many parts of the world. But we are not just talking about, sports here. We're talking really about the future of learning and the future of making us human in a world of artificial intelligence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Some astounding data and obviously some fascinating topics covered there. Please do get your questions ready, because I'm sure, obviously, it's font of all knowledge. I will kick off if that's okay. Look, so many of us here are obviously to discuss Learn to Swim and the importance of it. From your perspective, how important is it that we work in this framework within European curriculums? And how achievable is that?
Yeah, I always believe that international exchange and cooperation is a great source of inspiration. You could see that there is actually good variability in Europe on this. We can learn from countries that have a longer tradition of doing this, and the more we can develop common curricular standards, I mean, shared experiences, shared practices, the easier it will be to implement them at national levels. Because again, often this is an uphill struggle. There is, still a perception, and not just among policymakers, also among parents. If my child does sports, it will lose out on, music and mathematics and other things. And we have, I think, the more we can build a shared understanding that we're talking about two sides of the same coin, that we're talking about physical education, swimming, actually reinforcing many of the abilities that we value in education, then I think we can advance. So it's about Europe. I would even say it's about going beyond Europe. Now, the more we can share that understanding with other parts of the world, the more we will enable people across the world actually to be better prepared for the challenges of tomorrow. So yeah, absolutely. Europe is a starting point. The curriculum is a starting point. The curriculum is a limited space, but I think international cooperation is always, a source of inspiration.
I mean, that leads seamlessly into my next question, actually, which was going to be about the importance of working internationally beyond the continent of Europe. Are there any other particular examples from other nations that do it well, that you feel lessons can be learned from within Europe?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that's generally true in education. I would even say that, most of educational progress has happened in other parts of the world. Europe hasn't seen that much educational progress over the last 20 years. We do not have, people going more to sports. You look to North America, Canada, the United States. It's perhaps a more polarized picture, but certainly you have schools, institutions where sport is a much more integral part of the culture. Not just, it's not, again, a subject somewhere at the end, but it's something that permeates through this. And that's really how I would look at this, that sports, physical education should not just be a subject, but it should be an integral part of the curriculum on how we develop, human resilience, courage, leadership, sports, self-responsibility, and things like this. And there's lots we can learn from other countries, even some countries that have still limited number of sports hours. Think about a country like Japan, but the way they integrate it into the schooling day and really look at this as a way of developing humanity is something that I believe we can learn from. So absolutely, and we can also contribute a lot to the world. As you could see, students who are not physically active are less cognitively active. They are less socially active. They're less happy with their life. So if we want to create a happier, sharing world, sharing our own experiences in Europe can be a very important start.
Very important point. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions out there? Okay, if we could get a microphone up to the middle of the stage, please. Thank you.
In physical education, and more specifically swimming, do you have thoughts on AI in tomorrow's world?
I think my thoughts are in two ways here. I do believe that the advent of artificial intelligence pushes us to think much harder about what makes us human. Now, in a way, cognitive abilities are much greater at risk from artificial intelligence and physical abilities. And I'm not talking about just to become more athletic, but once again, AI pushes us to, make difficult decisions, to think harder about what's right and wrong, what's true and what's not true, to take greater sense of responsibility, to develop courage. And all of this, I think, that actually swimming and sports can help us to achieve. So that's really, I think, this complementarity between artificial intelligence and human capabilities is one thing that we, I think, need to take to heart. There's a great risk that, things like ChatGPT degenerate some human abilities. And that's not a new phenomenon. Think about, we now use Google Maps and we lost our sense of direction. Now we have given up a really, really important human skill, finding your own way, understanding the direction, having a sense of orientation. We have given that up for convenience. And artificial intelligence could make that happen in many, many other areas. So I'm not so worried about the direct connection between artificial intelligence and swimming and sports, but more about the indirect direction that, it gives us the illusion, well, we can just be passive consumers. We just, log onto the screen and find all the answers rather than, taking, our own responsibility, being active. And again, I think swimming, sports can give us that courage, that agency, that we can actually do things. And that really, for me, is the important relationship with artificial intelligence. Now, there is this great risk. I think artificial intelligence can empower us, can super empower us, can do lots of things for us. But there's also a great risk that it will disempower us, that it will make us, slaves of algorithms we no longer understand. And I do believe that, physical education, also the social, the relational aspect that physical education brings. You have teachers who actually work with you as an individual rather than just, broadcasting stuff into a classroom. You are working with your classmates directly. You see them, doing things. They're not just sitting in the classroom. Some students who may be not so great in, physics and chemistry or history, suddenly, excel in sports. I think all those things are really, really important in the world of artificial intelligence, those kind of social, emotional skills as well. So I hope really that we take that to heart and do not, have that illusion that, artificial intelligence can do everything for us.
Great. Thank you very much for the question. I was just going to pick up on that, actually, because it leads into there are obviously technological, you mentioned AI, lots of technological changes and social advancements that these current generations will be experiencing that previous ones did not. Does that present or give you more optimism or concern about the opportunities that there are for change going forwards?
Well, in some sense, technology has always been a great enabler. And it is a great opportunity for us to do things that we couldn't previously do. Today you can connect with people all around the world. You can collaborate with people in different ways and so on. So I actually think there are a lot of kind of positive views, but the reality is, particularly for small children, it becomes often a source of just consumption. And if you look again, 30, 40, 50% of 15-year-olds spending 50 hours of learning per week spent on the internet. That is a pretty, a massive amount of time. So there is a great risk that actually technology, makes us passive consumers of prefabricated content and takes away that agency, that time to socialize, to work with other people. The other part that I'm really worried about is that, technology, social media, connect you with people who think like you, who look like you, who work like you, and it's actually becoming harder and harder to engage with people who are different from you, who think differently from you. And again, sports is that great melting pot where you can actually, connect with people. You have to struggle with people who are different from you. And I think this is a very, very important human capability that I worry is getting lost in a world which creates these, bubbles that homogenize opinion and to make you always find people who believe in the same things that you do now.
Absolutely, challenge your own viewpoint. Point well made. Any more questions out there, please? I'm sure you're just thinking about them. Oh, we do have one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, Vita Balsita from World Aquatics. Thank you so much for your presentation and your ideas. And I think that the world of sports has really been working hard to make physical education as one of the core subjects. But it seems like as we put so much effort into that, but the change has not happened yet. Do you have any, and there's research and proof that, as what you mentioned, that sport is just such an important subject, and physical education is such an important subject for youth, for everyone. What do you think we have to do to make that paradigm shift, to make sure that physical education becomes one of the core subjects, not in one, not in two countries, but really all over the world?
You don't have to worry about the students. Students all love sports. So I think you'll have the support of the children, of the young people. I think you have to work harder on parents. Politicians often do what, parents are looking for. And many parents are reluctant about this. And we heard before in the presentation before, there could be cultural reasons for this, but I think the predominant reason is simply that parents worry, my time spends too much, if my child spends too much time on sports, it will not have enough time to do homework and mathematics. We need to be much better in presenting the evidence that shows actually that sports, physical activity actually reinforces cognitive, social, emotional abilities. And I think that is not yet public knowledge. It's often seen as competing with. Now that's, I think, the second dimension, making this much more visible, that we are talking about complementarities here, and that we are talking about many of the most important human skills in the 21st century that we can develop through physical activity. So working with parents, with society, I think is critically important. Third, working with teachers. And I must say here, many of the sports teachers still think, what they do is a separate subject. You go to the sports lesson, you become a better swimmer, or you become a better football player. And I do believe if we want to, give sports a central part in the curriculum, we have to look at this much more broadly. We have to, make sure that teachers understand this is not just about physical activity. This is where I'm going to help young children to find their place in a changing world. This is where I help them, to understand themselves, to understand their limits, to overcome their limits, to develop that courage, that growth mindset. Sports is a wonderful tool to develop growth mindset. To know that the sky is the limit. Actually, if you exercise, if you practice, you can overcome your limits. Now, that's something that's much harder to achieve in other subjects. That you develop responsibility for yourself, that you develop responsibility for other children. You catch them or not, that makes a real difference. And I think this is something that many sports teachers do not, currently perceive. They just think, I'm teaching another subject like mathematics. So again, embedding, if we want to make it part of the core curriculum, we need to strengthen those kinds of connections. I think if we work on those three fronts, we can achieve a lot. And the reason I say this is that some countries are just so much better than others. The last point I want to make is about facilities. Now, obviously, sports requires, science requires some facilities, but that's often exaggerated. I think we just have to be more creative on that. Maybe swimming is the most difficult part. Swimming, you do need a leg, or you need a swimming pool, but there are many, many other ways in which we can practice exercise and sports where we just have to be a little bit more creative. And I think many schools could be doing this. So I put that really last. It's often seen as the bigger obstacle by schools themselves often. But, I would discount that. I think really the primary obstacle is, our understanding in society that we are actually building humanity and not taking time away from cognitive subjects. The work with teachers, that they see that broader kind of picture. And then last but not least, that we make it a part of the core curriculum.
Fascinating. Any more questions before we round up the session? Looking out, last opportunity. No? Okay, I'll fire one more at you, Andreas, if that's okay. Look, you've worked with governments, with industries. How much buy-in is there, do you feel, for approaches like the Learn to Swim and embedding those within curriculums? Because obviously, we see so often that policies can be dictated by what seems to be popular or what is economically viable in the short term. So how do we tackle, getting these into the policies in the here and now?
Yeah, I must actually say in some countries, there's a growing understanding that this is important, particularly in East Asia. There was little emphasis on sports and physical education in the past. There's now more emphasis to this. The research and the science speak a very clear language, and that language is understood and heard in those countries. I'm not so sure about the Western world. I think there is often a move more back to basics. Let's do school, doing the core business and everything else. Make extracurricular activities. I think actually you have to work harder to make that case in a much more public way, not just to speak to the converted, but actually make a much more compelling public case. We're talking about something that isn't just, an activity outside school, but something that is absolutely central. And I want to come back to this question on artificial intelligence. I really believe that sports, physical education is a big part of the answer to equip us for a world of artificial intelligence.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, Andreas Fleischer. Everybody, ladies and gentlemen, if you could give him a huge round of applause. A fantastic presentation.
Thank you very much.
I can't give you, obviously, your thank you gift in person, but we'll make sure that gets in the post to you. Thank you so much for being involved today. Brilliant.
Thank you again.
Before we go...